Hello, Marcelo.
Good morning, Jelena.
How are you?
Fine, thank you very much. Really happy to be here.
Great to have you. Great to have you. Is anyone going to be joining you?
Yes, Professor Spanjol is also on screen. She's
Great.
Jelena.
I would love for you to pronounce your name so I can say it correctly. How do you pronounce your name?
So my name is Jelena Spanjol. Jelena?
Jelena?
Yeah, like you're yelling at somebody. Jelena Spanjol.
I got it.
But Marcelo is going to handle the whole presentation. So we're going to minimize the back and forth, and Marcelo is going to take a lead. I'll be in the background. And so with the questions, I might jump in at the end and let Marcelo take the lead here. Great to meet you. Great to see you here. Thank you for having us.
Oh, our pleasure. Now, I just want to be clear. It looks like there's kind of two presentations.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. Okay. So that's they are complementary, but I'm going to explain that at the beginning. So
okay,
plan so that we are done after 30 minutes more or less, so that we have time for questions.
All right. Well, you can go up and share your screen so we can make sure that's working.
With pleasure.
Beautiful. Okay, so just put it on slide share, and that's great. And I will be back in one.
Just read the message in the chat room, because we are not talking. Very good point. So we are just waiting one more minute and we will start on time of 10:15 US time, not US time, but New York time. So just one more minute, please, and then we start. All right, so I would start. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. My name is Marcelo de la Cruz. I'm a researcher at the LMU Munich School of Management in Munich, Germany. And together with Professor Jelena Spanjol, we are very happy to be here and being able to present to you two amazing research projects that we are conducting at the moment. And as we heard in the introduction, so for-profit firms play a major role in enabling shared prosperity. And that's what we are looking on for-profit firms and their contribution to society. And the first part of our presentation, the first project that we are presenting, deals with a strategic orientation perspective on for-profit firms' contribution to society. So we're looking at organizational level, what does it mean? And in the second part, we are going down into the individual level, so looking at people and how they react or how they manage such a change in the business model towards doing good. Let's start with the first project. So for-profit firms' contribution to society. In the next 10 minutes, 15 minutes, I would like to talk to you about these four major topics. On the one hand, so why do we care about strategic orientations and social value? In the second step, how did we develop the concept and the construct that we are going to present to you? And what the hell does it mean, strategic social value orientation? And at the end, some of the implications that we have derived out of our work. So the strategic orientation, so that's a very interesting word. So strategic orientations, they are very critical on how firms design, manage, and market their offerings. So strategic orientations create behaviors in organizations that secure firms' long-term profitability. And the body of research that we have on strategic orientations is concentrated on the centrality of two value types. That's the centrality of financial and customer value. So those two value types are studied under the premise that they are enabling a superior organizational performance. But as we have seen, and we know, and we don't need to discuss that topic again, there's a new imperative of contributing to society. So it's not only financial and customer value, but it's also social value, what is driving the discussion in modern times. So, and that's why we need a strategic orientation that accordingly responds to this expanded view on firms' value creation. So a value creation that goes beyond financial and customer value. And it's not really new. So there is a couple of research out in the field but they are using different banners on what does it mean, a strategic orientation that describes firms' contribution to society. And they use ad hoc approaches for measuring such a strategic orientation. And in a nutshell, so what is the gap that we see in there is that those definitions or those conceptualizations of the strategic orientation accounting for firms' contributions to society are not consistently aligned to the concept of social value. And that's a major challenge because we don't even know what social value is. So that's also another discussion that we have in the field. And the second thing is that the conceptualization that we see out there, they lack a concerted definition and operationalization, and that hinders the comparability across studies in the different fields. So how do we solve this problem, or how do we approach this problem? And therefore we follow a very systematic 5-step approach according to Short et al. And in a first step, for sure, we need to create a concept of what does it mean strategic social value orientation. As I mentioned before, one of the major challenges is that we don't have a concerted definition of what is social value. So what we did is we conducted that integrative, interdisciplinary review and content analysis of social value conceptualizations. And we went into different disciplines, management, psychology, marketing, organizational behavior, etc., and collected 146 definitions that we dissected with a framework that we developed. And based on that, we derived a conceptualization of this strategic social value orientation. And in the second step, we translated this strategic orientation, this concept, into a word list, a closed word list that enables us to make, through textual analysis, the measurement of this strategic value orientation. And this word list, or this word list that we derived, we assess the content validity, the external validity, the dimensionality, and the predictive validity. I will explain a little bit more later what we have done in there. So, you don't need to read the next slide. It's only to show that we have done it systematically. We applied the Joya template in order to, as I mentioned before, dissect the social value definitions that we found out in business literature and aggregate that into first-order concepts, second-order themes, and aggregate dimensions that enable us to describe the strategic social value orientation. And what is that? And that's our definition. So in a nutshell, SSVO, or strategic social value orientation, is a firm's orientation towards promoting the common good. So a pretty tautological definition. So what does it mean in detail? That means that is a set of behaviors and beliefs that direct the business activities towards promoting a better living condition for people that are embedded in an institutional and a natural environment. And Jen mentioned also at the beginning that at Rutgers, for example, you have this system thinking, and that's exactly part of our conclusion out of the integration of different social value definitions. So social value deals not only with people, but also with the holistic system of an institutional environment, because we are living with a government, we are living with companies, we are living with education, with schools, etc. So we have an institutional environment, but also natural environment. So we have trees, water. So all of the environment that we need in order to live. So that's in a strategic orientation towards social value creation. And if your question is, so what does it mean, better living conditions? So better living conditions is everything that is appropriate for humanity and supports a favorably state of being, for example, health, income, social integration. So that's our definition of a strategic social value orientation. And what are those behaviors and beliefs that we mean in here? So we have 3 behavioral components that characterize a strategic social value orientation. We need companies to have a leading witness with purpose. That means companies have internalized the role of their firm toward relative to the society, and they have been able to align that role with the values of managers and employees. The second element, or the second component, is support of stakeholders. Already heard 1,000 times. But what does it mean exactly, support of stakeholders as part of a strategic orientation? That means that companies not only acknowledge the existence of different stakeholders, but they also understand the needs of those stakeholders and are able to respond to the stakeholders. This is not only what we call the greenwashing or whitewashing, that we say we are standing for women or we are standing for poor people. It's also that they are integrating that into the business model so that they are able to respond to those needs. And the third thing, and that's a little bit the link to the next project I'm going to present to you, is that firms are able to focus on consequences. So that means, on the one hand, that firms acknowledge that every business activity might have a positive or negative effect on the stakeholders. So that's inevitable, that will happen. But it's important for firms to have the capability to anticipate those effects and to go consciously with those effects. And these 3 behavioral components, again, leading business with purpose, support of stakeholders, and anticipation of consequences, or the focus on consequences, sorry, they are founded on a shared belief that is the mutuality. And that's exactly what also Jean said at the beginning, the citation from Pope Francis. It's exactly about the mutual good. So it's you win, I win. That's a desirable result of value creation in business. And that's one shared belief that might lead companies to create social value. And the second thing is that this value creation in for-profit firms is founded on moral principles that are in line with universal ethical principles. So that's a conceptualization we have behind so a very comprehensive mapping to the different, or to the integrative review of social value definitions that we had. But it is not only about having a concept, it's also about the ability to measure that strategic orientations, as we do it already today with market orientation or technology orientation or entrepreneurial orientation. And therefore, we derive from this integrative review a list of words. And again, you don't need to read it in here, a list of words that enable us through textual analysis to measure what is the strategic orientation towards contributing to society of for-profit firms. And in order to validate this content analytic measure, we use CEO's letters to shareholders. So that's one of the possibilities, or one of the mediums that firms use in order to communicate to shareholders, in order to communicate what are the emphasis that we have in the business, what are the strategies that we are pursuing. And that's why we use CEO letters to shareholders. And the result is, as I mentioned before, our validation provides evidence that the measure that we have developed has a content validity, is empirical generalizable, is a multidimensional construct, and enables us to predict exactly social value orientation. And I'm going to show you exactly the last aspect because that was very interesting for us to see that. Please look at the right side of the slide. We use two different firm samples in order to assess that predictive validity. JC and Cicadas are just capital and corporate knights firms. So there are two different listing of firms that are supposed to be very sustainable. That's the construct that we link to our construct, that they have a sustainability emphasis. And on the other hand, we have Standard & Poor's 500 firms. Those firms are the ones, as you know, that have a financial emphasis. And we use these two firm samples and triangulated our results with the sustainability ratings that these firms have from CSR Hub. CSR Hub provides a very holistic sustainability assessment of for-profit firms. And the result is what you see with the red line at the bottom of the slide, is that our measure is able to predict a firm's orientation towards promoting the common good. And something that is also interesting, our measure is also able to predict the future sustainability performance of a firm. We use a time lag of 1 year. All right, so what do we do with this? We have some implications for practitioners, and similar as market orientation and technology orientation, SSVO is nothing else than a cultural transformation mean that we have in firms. So if we want to transform a firm towards social value orientation, we need to change part of the culture. And this is exemplary what might be interesting. So before we institutionalize social value orientation, we might start with creating the culture in terms of defining new values, defining norms for our employees, and creating artifacts that support those behaviors. So that's part, for example, the language and the metaphors that managers are using in communication every day in the firms. And after that, it's a long process, we might start formalizing SSVO practices in a firm, changing the leadership style, adapting some of the core processes, for example, innovation management. It's crucial in order to create social value, and also bringing a recursive process that enables us to check and maintain those practices along the time. And not only for practitioners, our research has also some implications for theory. So if you go to the seminal work of Naber and Slater, where they define and develop market orientation, they also address the societal marketing dimension, as they say. So marketing is not only about creating value for customers and for the company itself, but it's also we have a role in the society. And they didn't answer that question. And that might be one way of answering exactly that question. And what is also important, so SSVO is not a solely strategic orientation for firms. It is a complementary strategic orientation. It must and it should live together with a market orientation, for example. And in those cases, when they are able to live together, we found some evidence that SSVO might increase overall performance. And that is because SSVO enables firms, for example, to be more future-oriented, to gain more legitimacy and gain better workforces, for example. So it has effects on the innovation success of firms that in turn might increase firms' overall performance. And last but not least, what I mentioned before, our construct is not only a measure for social value orientation, but can be used as a potential predictor on firm sustainability performance. And we are planning some research for the future where we use this measure in order to confirm the predictability, what I mentioned before. So SSVO, we propose something that is strategic orientation is aligned to the social value concept. That's important. So it's consistent with what we have as a definition of social value out in the field. It advances the measurement methodology at organizational level, and it informs also business practitioners on behavioral characteristics that are needed in order to transform a company into contributing to society. So that was in a very fast pace. That's the organizational view on for-profit firms' contribution to society. And we might go to the questions afterwards, and I would be a very short introduction into the second topic that goes into the individual level. So one level down, what does it mean to contribute for the common good? All right, so The second one, and that's very, very interesting because we are going to look into the future a little bit. It's entitled Applying Conviction Narratives for Business Model Innovation for Good. And again here, what we want to see is you can imagine that you have either a new company, so you're an entrepreneur, you are founding a new firm, you have an emphasis because you're triggered by your investors, for example, to contribute for financial success. But the imperative has changed. So those companies or those small firms or those entrepreneurs need also to consider to do something good to contribute to the society. And that is exactly the second step. And what are the challenges involved for those individuals when they are confronted exactly with doing a business model innovation in order to contribute to society? And one lens on exactly the challenges that individuals have is our conviction narratives. And I'm going to explain it later to you what are those conviction narratives. And because this project is at the moment being developed, just a very short overview on what we are planning to do. So the main aspect here is business models can be seen either as structured management tools that make relevant elements for business success in a very systematic manner, or what is more interesting for us, that business models are narratives that help all of the people involved what stakeholder value and how this value is created. So to say, business models are cognitive or linguistic schemes. That means if we want to change a business model, that would mean that integrating, for example, social value creation rationale into the business model, into for-profit business model, would require individuals to change their narrative, change the cognitive scheme, or adapt the cognitive scheme. And that is not trivial. So why is that not trivial? That is not trivial because we are forced to make today decisions about the future that might be tomorrow, but that also might be 2 years, 3 years, 4 years ahead. And if you're a business model innovator in the proximal future, where you need to survive, you need to be agile, you might be able to make those decisions based on a deductive logic. Why? Because you are able to award outcome probabilities to the outcomes that you are envisioning. So those decisions are made with rational and systemic decision-making mechanisms. However, if we increase the time span and we go into distal futures where you really change your business model, you are driven more by long-term success, by sustained value management. And in those cases, you don't have outcome probabilities. You have a lot of ambiguities and you don't have data and facts in order to make decisions. And you are more driven by feelings. So I love it or I hate it, or by desirability. I wish it will happen in a certain way. And when people are doing those decisions in the future with incomplete information, high uncertainty, ambiguity, they usually construct narratives, so-called conviction narratives, and those narratives enable decision-making, enable action. And this is a theory, conviction narrative theories, that is a very humanistic view on decision-making that comes from the psychology from Professor Tackett, where he used this theory to explain why we had the financial crisis a couple of years ago. So what happened that investors didn't see the signs of the environment and all of the calls out of the government, and instead just made the decisions with as a sort of a black box. And he uses this theory in order to explain why does it happen. And we are using exactly the same theory in order to explain what drives or what characterizes conviction narratives of people that are changing the business model towards contributing to society. So innovation for good. And this process, this conviction narratives, you can see them as structured hypotheses that result from two processes: something deliberative, that means with facts, with observations, with things that we know, and emotional processes, what I mentioned before. So desirability, what I feel, this antagonism, I love or hate something that will happen in the future. And these conviction narratives enable people to make sense of that what they see at the moment, and thereby create a prediction of what will be the outcome of my action, and therefore guide my action. And why are they important? Because they make those conviction narratives make meaningful sense of situations and simulate alternative representations of the future outcomes of action. So it enables us to look into the future and make decisions. And by making those decisions, a narrative, because it's a linguistic approach, enables also people, decision makers, to communicate to others and gain support for the decision that we are taking. And that's exactly the theory that we are going to use in an entrepreneurial program that we have at the LMU Munich School of Management. And in this program, so we have founders from around the world that start the program without explicitly having social contribution in their business model. And they follow this 5-step approach where we have workshops, we have coachings, we have knowledge transfer, we have best practices. And by the end, they maybe might have integrated social contribution into the business model or not. And what we are doing is we are talking to those, observing those coaching sessions, looking at the documents and conducting interviews before they start the program. So what is the narrative? What is the business model? What is the cognitive scheme that they start the program? And afterwards, so after half a year, 1 year, 1.5 years, what is the new narrative that is driving your outcome and vision in the future of success? And we want to gather those feelings, those emotions, those observations. So what are the characteristics of the narratives that drive the people in order to contribute to the society? And what do we hope gaining by that? So we want, on the one hand, by knowing what are the narratives that entrepreneurs are using, we want to derive implications for business model innovation programs towards social value creation. That means intra or entrepreneurs. So what might need those programs to integrate in order to trigger those narratives that convince people of changing their business model? And it will help us to better understand how for-profit business model might be aligned effectively to social value creation from the beginning on, avoiding artificial add-ons that might be later like philanthropy programs or just one-time CSR program that the companies bring into the business model. And that contributes also to innovation management and CNT, that's conviction narrative theory, body of knowledge, as we are looking into those mechanisms that are giving rise to narratives that enable businesses to be a force for good. So thank you very much. Two very complete different projects. The first one at the organizational level on strategic orientations, and the second one looking at individuals and the challenge that they have when we go from a full for-profit business model into a for-profit business model that authentically contributes to society.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Marcelo and Jelena. And we can chat questions, or you can raise your hand and ask questions now. I thought that was extremely interesting and profound as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're interested in all kinds of feedback. As you can tell, this is work in progress at 2 different levels, and we're trying to connect concepts across projects that we're conducting, which is a challenge in and of itself. But as has been probably discussed in this group also before, the literature in this domain around social value, social innovation, social aspects of business acting has been burgeoning, but it's all over the place. So we have decided that we want to concertedly try to link the dots across our different projects. We have others that Marcelo and I work on together, but also in the larger group at our institute and the center at LMU. So we're interested in anything you have to say. Questions or comments? Thank you.
Thank you. So anyone can raise your hand and make a comment or a question, or just chat it. Don't see any yet.
I think Matt has a question.
Oh, I think Matt Polsky is trying to figure out how to raise his hand. Hey, Matt, how are you? Good to see you. Okay, Matt, go ahead, unmute yourself, please.
Hi, Gina.
Hi.
Thank you. I learned a lot. Oops, sorry.
That's always the way.
I learned a lot. Thank you. But two suggestions, and a third is less important. The first two are, if we're looking for measures of strategic social value, why not just turn to the UN SDGs? And relatedly, I'm very happy that, because I've been watching for many decades now, that the natural system is now part of the thinking. I've been waiting a long time for these kind of things, but it still seems to me that it's a stepchild. We're facing an enormous biodiversity crisis with over 1 million species projected to be gone. I would suggest that you think about being a little more explicit that the natural system doesn't just include humans. It's not all about humans anymore, and kind of get the narratives moving more in that direction. So those are my two suggestions for now.
Great, Matt. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This is really important. Can I just quickly respond to this?
Go ahead.
And so maybe you have also
Wait, no, go ahead.
a point if there's time. Really interesting points. Let me speak to the first one first. So the SDGs as goals are really great, and I think we can certainly double check to make sure that we have in our dictionary. I believe we did have the SDGs represented in the dictionaries, but we wanted to go beyond, and we wanted to link specifically not just towards goals and intentions and kind of these categories we wanted, and that's why we turned to the strategic orientations literature, because we wanted to link the beliefs, kind of the principles anchored in the beliefs that shape the intentions towards those SDG goals with behaviors that express those strategic intentions. All right. And so, but it's really great. We'll go back to the dictionary and just double check, and also perhaps highlight in the writing how this relates and how it has been taken up in the empirical part. On the second point, you're so right. I mean, when you were talking, I was thinking about kind of the One Health definition that links human, animal, kind of an environmental, the well-being in a much more inclusive and holistic sense. And that is important for us to continue to link. I agree with you also on this, that it has gone almost a parallel thinking and measuring and efforts, even within the same company, things don't connect across, let alone in some of the conceptual work. So you've given us a great challenge to keep in mind and top of our mind. I really appreciate that, Matt.
Great, thank you. I also want to mention that One Health will be featured this afternoon at 1 o'clock. Gloria Bachman, the head of the Women's Health Institute, is going to be speaking about One Health, which is a fascinating area of human and animal connection. So thanks. Go ahead. Any other questions? Or Marcelo, did you want to comment, please?
No, nothing to add. That is exactly the
right.
answer. Thank you, Jelena.
Okay, excellent. Any other questions? We have a few more minutes. Our next session, I believe, is at 11 o'clock. So we have a few more minutes for discussion or questions.
I think, Marcelo, you presented so much. Everybody's still trying to process.
And Matt, you can mute yourself again. And not that I ever would want to mute Matt.
Oh, I think you do.
We go way back. Okay. Who
I
else
do
do we
have one. I do have one, but only if nobody else has anything.
Okay, I have see a question from Catherine Giscombe. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Wondering if you have considered integrating the views of Paul Adler, who has addressed workplace disempowerment and unresponsive governments. And not sure if there's more there.
Could you maybe unmute yourself and expand on that a little bit, Catherine? I think this is a really interesting tack, which doesn't immediately, I cannot say, yes, absolutely, we've gone that
Right.
away.
Hi.
Hi.
I guess I was thinking about the sociologist Paul S. Adler, who's written about the 99% economy. And I know that, your focus isn't entirely on economics, but, his thesis is like going toward democratic socialism to overcome the crises of capitalism. But there's such a big disconnect between what he would, like profit-making companies to do and what they're willing to do. So I wondered if you had any thoughts about that.
So is that for both projects you see that, or more for the first one? Because we're really talking about corporates and for-profits in there.
Whatever is germane for profit organizations.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I'm actually reading the book right now and thinking about these aspects where we have not directly coded for workplace disempowerment and government regulations. We have focused more, and maybe that's too narrow, maybe we need to rethink that. We have focused on strategic actions, but what this makes me think of is if we expand the vocabulary around strategic actions to encompass these empowerment issues, the agency issues, I think we would get at beyond just the strategic orientation construct, or maybe add additional dimensions. So this is intriguing. I don't have a great answer to say, yes, I know exactly what the dictionary should be. But so for the first project, I could imagine a broader set of issues to be looked at. Now, I think a different data source might need to be pulled in, because the annual letters to the shareholders are supposed to represent, and maybe you have some great ideas, so I'm all ears. Marcelo is all ears too. But the data source that we currently use, so if we're coding, we're doing this content analysis and textual coding of the annual letters to the shareholders, then that is supposed to capture kind of at a very high level the most important kind of priorities of the firm going forward, and just looking at the past year. I'm not sure whether we're going to get all of these additional dimensions into that, but we could see over time. I would be interested in seeing over time. So organizations that have redefined their purpose and have aligned it more in that revised view that Paul Adler presents. Maybe there are trends to be looked at, and we don't have trends. So I think the time perspective here might be a good one. Marcelo, do you have additional comments? Or
yes.
Catherine, sorry, I interrupted you. If you have.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to also add that Moore Barak has written about just expanding who stakeholders are, stakeholder identities, to include the community. I wondered if that could even be part of the annual report, or just a letter to shareholders.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and this is what I think over time, we should see differences in that. So if we are, and also different vocabularies emerging. This is an really interesting comment. Thank you, Catherine.
An additional comment on that. So Catherine did from the approach that we follow. So we looked at social value conceptualizations in business literature, and I can confirm that workplace and democracy, at least those two aspects, are part of social value definitions. So through the integrative review that we conducted, and afterwards deriving the list of words or the dictionary, we have those two aspects integrated into the dimension. So workplace, employees, that aspect is within the stakeholder behavioral component, and empowerment and democracy is within the leading with purpose component. from the approach that we follow. So we didn't cross-check that with Paul Adler's work, but I think it's a very interesting and at least as a future research, we should do that mapping. That's very cool. Yeah, thank you.
I love how interdisciplinary this research is. It's fabulous. Sandra Hamilton has a question. Do you want to unmute yourself and you can just ask it, or you want me to read it? Go ahead.
Yeah, I can speak.
Please.
I'm in Manchester. I'm a Canadian. My PhD research is currently looking at the demand side of your supply side work. So how does government procurement reinvent itself to better reward these non-financial outcomes and move procurement away from this focus on price-driven low bid? So have you given any thought to that, or perhaps we could have conversations where we could look at turning some of your ideas on the supply side into demand-oriented criteria?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, so I just was thinking, that's why I was with a lost view onto the ceiling, because it's a very interesting aspect. So I think so the SSVO is that business philosophy that drives contribution to society, additionally to a market orientation, technological orientation, etc. And I can imagine, so just my thoughts on your question, Sandra, the government triggers, I think, at least the three behavioral components that we have defined. For example, the anticipation of consequences or focusing on consequences. That means that I have the transparency of knowing if I am sourcing, for example, in the automotive industry, if I am sourcing aluminum die casting parts from Mexico, and I know that in Mexico, we have our factory because people do not have environmental rules, that would be part of focusing on consequences, that I take that into account when I do that decision. That means if the government gives me some help and hints how I can integrate that focus on consequences, that would be that cross-fertilizing between SSBO and government stimulation, as an example.
For sure, but I mean, the reality right now is that we continue to reward low price dominance in government, and you know we've had many years of government, the language of efficiency, and I think what we need to do is be talking about government playing a different role and government procurement behaving very differently to private sector procurement. In actual fact, there's many examples of private sector procurement being much more socially responsible than government procurement at the moment. So I guess I'm advocating for reimagining completely the role of government procurement. And one of the theories I'm developing, which I'll put out there, is priceless procurement, which is how do we embed priceless social values into these tradings that we need to do. We have to trade, but we're seeing a rise in non-financial social and environmental values. And so I think, could we have a situation where in known markets, we go to market with a fixed price, and where the sustainability aspect is the award criteria?
Well, that would be ideal, right? For in our group, I don't think we would have much disagreement on that. And I've been thinking, listening to you, what kind of a decision support tool might look like that would use measures such as SSVO, and there are of course others, right, that characterize different suppliers, and whether there is kind of a dashboard system that could be pooling SSVO, you know, maybe B Corp certification, other maybe GRI component. I mean, we can really think broadly here. There is an abundance to choose from, and whether there are actually examples already out there, maybe on a small scale, and in communities where governmental agencies are more agile, let's say, because I think agility, or the lack thereof, is probably a big issue, in addition to the budget constraints that you're mentioning.
Yeah, and I think budget constraints is a really big part of it, which is why I actually advocate for telling the market how much money you've got. Saving a very small amount of money is actually the least interesting opportunity in procurement. So I think, could we attract in more innovative companies with more social and environmental orientations to the public procurement pool of bidders if we told the market how much money we've got in government procurement and the outcomes that we're looking for, and we awarded accordingly. So tomorrow is a very big day in this world, in the United Kingdom, because tomorrow the National Health Service becomes the first health service in the world to mandate social and environmental criteria in its 269 billion pounds of procurement. And that's a world first. I think it's a very big deal. I've been in this space for over 10 years and I didn't think this would happen in my lifetime. So I think we need to celebrate the wins, celebrate the successes, and you won't be able to bid. The 88,000 global suppliers will not be able to bid on NHS contracts after tomorrow unless they are evaluating or they're proposing how they will deliver social and environmental value. And if it's over 5 million, they must have a carbon reduction plan to even bid, not to be awarded, but to even bid. So I think there's progress being made.
That's fantastic. Linda commented on that in the US, the government procurement regulations state lowest cost given all other factors. It's the all other factors that government procurement often ignores. The criteria that government procurement officers are supposed to follow state that the contractor proposals be responsive and responsible. Again, mostly ignored. So holding government procurement to account for following the laws and regulations is very important. Excellent. If you want to put something in the chat, I'd love to see more about that UK breakthrough. That's fantastic news. I hadn't heard that. And we're almost out of time, so I'm going to let Marcelo and Jelena say any final comments.
Excellent conversation. Thank you so much, everyone, for the comments, suggestions, the challenges, and the questions. I'll leave the final words to Marcelo.
Thank you, Jelena. Nothing to add. Thank you very much. Really enriching and happy to be here.
This was wonderful and exciting presentation and a lot to learn. I really appreciate it. Have a great day. We'll see you next at 11 o'clock to learn more about social entrepreneurship in stigmatized settings, the case of femtech. See you there. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Again. Great job.
Thank you.
And there's the link. Sandra sent the link. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will close the session. Don't be afraid.
Yes, we're going to close it in a second. Thank you. I think people were just leaving it open for a second for people to get that link. Okay. Bye. See you next time. Next session.